Jeremiah's hands shook so bad, he could barely hold the pipe steady. His lips trembled against the glass, his chest tight with need. He sucked in once, twice, nothing but a bitter whisper. Sweat slicked his palms, and before he could try again, the pipe slipped. It hit the cracked linoleum with a sharp clink, rolling fast down the dark hallway. Damn. Jeremiah scrambled after it, knees scraping the floor. The pipe spun to a stop just outside a locked door. He pressed his face low, peering into the thin gap beneath. There it was, gleaming in the dusty light, just beyond reach. He stretched his arm flat, fingers clawing. The pipe rolled a little further away, mocking him. Jeremiah's fingertips grazed it once, then lost it again. His chest ached with frustration, need gnawing at his gut. He pushed harder, his cheek flat against the floor, his wrist wedged tight beneath the doorframe. Almost. A sudden fist tangled in his hair, yanking his head back so hard his vision blurred. Pain seared through his scalp, where his cornrows had once held his hair neat and tight. Now, loose, frayed, easy to grab. You think I'm playing with you? The dealer's voice dripped slow and mean in his ear. The smell of smoke and sweat clung to him, heavy as the grip on Jeremiah's head. Where my money at? Jeremiah winced, hands clawing at the grip. I'll get it, he said quickly, breath ragged. Just give me a little more time. The man leaned closer, teeth bared in a slow, careless grin. You better, he said, low and certain. Or else, I'll make sure you ain't got no fingers left to smoke with. He shoved Jeremiah forward, the doorframe catching him just enough to sting. Jeremiah slumped there, heart pounding, eyes flicking back to the pipe lying inches away on the other side of the door. Out of reach. Always out of reach. By the next afternoon, Jeremiah was back on the streets. He had showered that morning at the Peachtree Pine Shelter, just south of Midtown, scrubbing until the steam cupped through the grime of the night before. Clean skin, fresh shirt, and a splash of drugstore cologne. He knew presentation mattered. Nobody paid for somebody who looked like they'd given up. He walked Midtown, with his shoulders squared, eyes scanning. His mother's voice still rang in his ear, the last thing she said before she slammed the door on him. You steal from me again, you out for good. And he had. Cash from her purse, gone in an instant, traded for smoke and a few hours of forgetting. That's when the black Lexus slowed at the curb, windows tinted, wheels shining, a car that didn't belong to anybody on his side of town. The glass slid down. A man in a crisp suit leaned out, voice smooth, practiced. How you doing? You want to go for a ride? Jeremiah tugged at the hem of his wife beater, making sure it sat right against his chest. It depends, he said flatly. How much you paying? The man's smile spread across his face. I'll make it worth your while. I promise. Jeremiah thought of the dealer's threats from last night, of how good it would feel to have cash in his pocket again. He opened the door and slid into the cool leather seat. Sheldon, the man said, extending a hand like they were meeting at a dinner party instead of a street corner. Sheldon Brown. Jeremiah just nodded. Jeremiah. The Lexus glided through Midtown traffic like it owned the streets. Jeremiah leaned back against the cool leather, his eyes darting to the dash, the steering wheel, the gold-trimmed interior. Everything in the car whispered of another life, one he'd never been invited into. Sheldon kept one hand on the wheel, the other drumming lightly against his thigh. At first, he seemed calm, practiced, like a man who had done this before and made peace with it. But Jeremiah caught the quick glances, the way he kept looking at the rearview mirror, as if he were checking to see if someone was following him. You live around here? Sheldon asked, voice smooth but careful. Jeremiah gave a short laugh. If I did, I wouldn't be standing on that corner. Sheldon smiled, but there was something behind it. Relief, maybe, that the boy could joke, or maybe guilt. He didn't press. Instead, he pulled the car into the circular drive of a hotel. Jeremiah had only seen in passing, the kind with valets in pressed uniforms and a lobby that gleamed. Jeremiah stiffened. We going in there? Not through the front. Sheldon turned the wheel, guiding them around to a side entrance. He parked, cut the engine, and sat there a moment like he was gathering himself. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp fold of bills, and held them across the console. Aft now, he said quietly. The rest after. Fair? Jeremiah took the cash without hesitation, but his hand lingered a bit longer than it needed to. Inside the hotel room, everything spoke of quiet luxury. Soft amber lighting, linen drapes that pooled onto the floor, and a king-sized bed dressed in crisp white sheets. A decanter filled with wine sat on the nightstand beside a small vase of orchids, the kind of understated elegance meant to impress without ever feeling showy. Jeremiah stood just inside the door, taking it all in. No client had ever taken him to a place like this before. Usually, it was budget motels off the interstate, thin walls, flickering lamps, and the lingering smell of smoke that never quite washed out of the curtains. But this was different. The room was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like it had been built for people who didn't want to be found. For a moment, he forgot who he was supposed to be, the boy who charged by the hour, the body for rent. Standing there beneath the low golden light, he felt almost seen. Important, even. Like maybe he was worth the kind of softness this room promised. Sheldon set his briefcase down on the desk, loosened his tie, and for the first time since Jeremiah got in the car, looked straight at him. Not with quick guarding glances, not with shame, with hunger and something Jeremiah couldn't name. Inside the privacy of the hotel room, Sheldon finally felt at ease. Now he could get a proper look at Jeremiah. Take your clothes off, he said in a low voice. Jeremiah began to undress, hands moving swiftly, but Sheldon held up a finger. No, slowly. Jeremiah peeled off his shirt, then his pants, and at last stepped out of his underwear in a deliberate, measured street tease. Sheldon instructed him to turn around, and Jeremiah complied. Sheldon's gaze roamed over his smooth, caramel-brown skin, appreciating the slim, muscular form, the firm, round cheeks, and the impressive length between his legs. Finally, his eyes settled on Jeremiah's face, his full, pouty lips, almond-shaped eyes, thick, curly lashes, and the cornrows braided down his back. Slowly closing the gap, Sheldon whispered, "You're beautiful." Jeremiah was speechless. No one had ever spoken to him that way before. Sheldon reached for the wine on the nightstand, poured a little onto his fingers, and held them out. Jeremiah tasted the wine, announcing it good, determined not to seem uncultured. He'd never had wine before. Leaning close, Sheldon took Jeremiah's mouth into his, licking the lingering wine from his lips. He laid Jeremiah down on the bed, his touch gentle yet firm. As he caressed every inch of his body, he pressed soft kisses along Jeremiah's thighs before moving between his legs. He began with gentle, teasing motions, trailing his tongue over the tender head, before taking in the full length. "Turn over," he commanded, his voice thick with lust. Jeremiah complied, and Sheldon spread his cheeks as he kissed and licked him, easing his tongue inside. Jeremiah stifled moans into a pillow, careful not to alarm the other guests. Finally, Sheldon fit on a condom and positioned himself. He slid in slowly, then found a steady, unhurried rhythm, that never felt too rough. Jeremiah trembled as he came, his release warm against the sheets. Sheldon collapsed on top of him, exhausted and breathing hard. Jeremiah turned to look at him, but Sheldon rolled over, suddenly uncomfortable. This was just business, he reminded himself. He didn't want Jeremiah getting the wrong idea. He grabbed a towel, wiping himself clean, and threw it to Jeremiah so he could do the same. Sheldon handed Jeremiah the rest of his money and escorted him out of the hotel. Sheldon dropped him off at the same curb. Jeremiah started walking back toward the shelter, the stack of bills tucked deep in his pocket. For one stolen moment, he imagined himself in Sheldon's polished life. Everything ordered, nothing hungry. The thought felt both sweet and cruel. The fantasy didn't last. The city heat hit him hard, the hum of traffic loud in his ears. He shoved his hands deep into his pockets, feeling the money again. It was more than he'd seen in weeks. Enough to keep the dealer off his back, enough to buy a hot meal, maybe even a few nights of breathing room. But it came with something heavier. You could still see Sheldon's face when he'd loosened his tie, the way the man's eyes had softened, not just with lust, but need. Jeremiah's stomach twisted. He told himself it didn't matter. Money was money. This was just another hustle. Still, as he walked down Peachtree Street toward the shelter, he caught himself wondering what Sheldon would be doing right now. If he went home to his wife, if he thought about Jeremiah, the way Jeremiah couldn't stop thinking about him. The city swallowed the thought quick. Horns blared. Somebody cursed loud from a passing car. Jeremiah kept moving. Bills pressed tight against his thigh, like maybe if he held him close enough, they'd keep him safe. But deep down, he knew better. Nothing about this life was safe. The Brown household was quiet, except for the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Sheldon sat at the head of the table, the evening paper spread before him, though he hadn't read a single word. His wife, Denise, moved between the sink and the counter, humming low under her breath. Their two children, Marcus and Alana, were upstairs, the sound of cartoons and muffled laughter drifting down. On the surface, it was picture perfect. The kind of life Sheldon had built, brick by brick. A career in civil rights law, a family in a tidy house in Cascade Heights, Sunday mornings at church where his name carried weight. But his mind wasn't in the room. He saw Jeremiah instead, the way he looked that night in the hotel room, calm, yet carrying something he couldn't quite reach. He wanted more than touch. He wanted the story that built the young man, the hurt, the hope, the reason Jeremiah still carried both in his gaze. There was something about him that refused to be owned or fully known, and that only made Sheldon want him more. "Sheldon, you hear me?" Denise's voice broke through. He blinked, realizing she'd asked him something. Sorry. Long day. She looked at him, suspicion flickering, just for a second, before she turned back to the dishes. "You're working too hard. You need to be here more. For the kids. For me." "I know," Sheldon said automatically, but his hand clenched around the folded newspaper until the edge cut into his palm. That night, lying beside Denise in their king-size bed, Sheldon stared at the ceiling while she drifted off. The house was still. And in that quiet, he let himself admit what he hadn't dared say aloud. He wanted more of Jeremiah. Not just a transaction, not just a brief escape. More. The thought both terrified him and lit something in his chest he hadn't felt in years.